Hi there. Welcome to the Sober Circle channel. Enjoy this speaker tape.
Hi, my name is Johanna, and I am an alcoholic. And I'd like to start by thanking Cleve for inviting me out here. I'm very glad to be here, and it's a wonderful experience so far. I like what I've seen. I like what I've felt. I like what I've heard, and I'm glad. I'm very grateful just to be one more morning in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. I pray every morning for a grateful heart, and I do that for a lot of reasons, and I'm just really glad that I can start off this weekend at a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'd like to thank Bruce and Mike for picking me up at the airport and bringing me down here. It was a long drive, and they were, I'm just really glad I have makeup on, They made me feel real comfortable and real welcome, and thank you very much. What I see when I look around the room here, and I was thinking this last night, is how much this looks like Alcoholics Anonymous at home. It doesn't look any different at all, and I always seem to find it to be that way. When I first walked into my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous and I looked around, it looked just like you. It looked exactly the same. It never changes because it can't. And what I saw at my first meeting was this group of people, and like you, I thought they were well-dressed, and I thought they looked good. They were all cleaned up, and I was dirty. I walked into that meeting off the streets of Long Beach, and I had been in that condition for quite some time. And as I sat there, I sat on my hands in my early meetings. They shook so badly. I didn't want you to see how badly my hands shook. And as it was just before this meeting started, I looked around those rooms, and it seemed to me like all of you knew each other. You were laughing and talking and comfortable with each other, and I didn't know anyone here. Very naturally, I looked around, and I simply thought one more time that I was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and that had always been the story of my life. I saw no reason to believe that this was going to be any different for me. And those first meetings were some time ago. My sobriety date is February of '75, and all I can tell you is I have learned to come and sit here and feel just like I do when I'm sitting in a chair in my home. This has become the place where I come to have my soul touched and to have my heart touched. And I have never sat in a meeting and listened to you, because when I listen to you, you sound just like me, and then leave and not be a better person than the one that sat down. I didn't know that when I was new, and I didn't walk in here and I was not impressed. I felt different. I knew this was another cult in California. That's not hard to come up with. I didn't know what you were doing, but what I knew is that you were not like me, and that I was not going to stick around. I was not overwhelmed by you. When you hear my story, you're going to wonder where I got that kind of arrogance, but I didn't mean to stay. I never expected to need to be here, for that matter. None of us do. I myself came from a perfectly normal Irish Catholic alcoholic home, and I look back and my being here is absolutely predictable. I certainly never thought so, and I have never talked, nor will I to any extent this morning, about growing up, except very briefly. And I have learned, however, to tell you the truth about why I don't do that. It's because it's very painful. And I didn't realize that for a long time. I was comfortable saying, we all end up here anyhow. What difference does it make? The truth is that it was painful to grow up the way I grew up. A lot of us came from alcoholic homes, and it was angry, and it was violent, and there was a lot of anxiety and a lot of tension. And I still find it difficult to look back at. I have had to do that in the last few years. And all I know is that it would have been better done earlier in my sobriety. Sooner or later, I have had to find the patterns and the beliefs that govern my behavior in sobriety. I don't know where all of them come from, and I am going back now and having to learn that. But I know when I was a little girl in that home that whatever else was going on, it was certainly a Catholic home. And there were a lot of people in my life as a child. There were a lot of nuns and priests and relatives, certainly my family. These people all sat with me and talked to me about the difference between good and evil and right and wrong. I look back today and I have no argument with any of it. I've made my peace. All they were trying to do was trying to teach me how to live. And I listened to what they had to say, and we all react internally in different ways. And a real common story in this program is to hear someone talk about growing up very angry and very rebellious. That's a very, very common thing. And I was the opposite way. I listened to those people, and I bought what they said. I certainly wanted to be good. I wanted to be very good. I suppose at some level I thought if I could just be good enough, then everything else would be better. And we all, when we're kids, we all have fantasies of how we want to be when we're all grown up, and I did that too. And my fantasy was a little different. What I did was pick up Butler's Lives of the Saints, and I read it through. Now, if you're listening, you know it's going to get weird. And I picked out the one that I liked the very best, and that was how I wanted to be. You know, a lot of little girls want to be models or singers or actresses, so I don't know. I found the one that I liked the best, and this was Joan of Arc. And and there wasn't anything about her that I didn't like. I thought her death was very painful, but I thought the rest of it was real attractive. She was a powerful figure in France at her time. She really was. She changed the course of history in her time, and she was someone that saw visions and heard voices, and I was impressed by that. I was going to wait for the 60s for that experience myself, but even as a child, it impressed me. And last and certainly not least, I noticed that she was a woman in charge of a whole lot of men. And you're one of the very few men that ever laugh at that. The women all smile and men's lips get real grim. But it impressed me, and it still does, really. And that was how I formed an idea of how I wanted to be. This has nothing to do with Joan of Arc. What it has to do with is a child that was very unhappy and very frightened, and I formed an idea of the world in a very idealistic and very romantic way. There's still a lot of that in me. That's how I wanted to be, how I wanted to see the world, how I wanted to think things could be. And I'm someone who did well in school without trying very hard. I was bright. But far more important than that is that I have always been someone who has found it easier to turn to books and to turn to things. You know, rather than turn to you, to turn to people. People have always been hard for me. That's sometimes true today, and it's certainly how I grew up. I had no external problems in any of those early years. I grew up outside the country. My father knew how to do a geographic right. If you're going to move, you're going to move. And he moved us to Sumatra, Indonesia. And we returned here, and I graduated from a Catholic girls' school when I was 17 in Long Beach, is where we settled. And I remember how I felt that June when I graduated. I remember how the world looked to me, because I had picked up a lot of ambition, and I wanted to do a lot of things with my life. And I enrolled that fall at Cal State Long Beach with a major in the sciences, and for a period of time things fell in place for me academically in a way I was used to. And then something happened. You know, a lot happened for me to be at this podium this morning. And the beginning of that change was a very simple one. It always is. And I simply was on this campus, and I began going to these college fraternity parties. And I don't know how to talk about that in a way that will explain to you what a difference this was for me. I'm a product of Catholic girls' schools, and college fraternity parties were another order of life altogether, you know. And it was at one of those parties that I had my first drink. The guy I was with, my date, turned to me at this party, and I remember that room to this morning. I remember exactly how it looked. I remember the look of the people, and he turned to me at this party and asked me if I wanted a drink. And I bet a lot of us began drinking in a similar way. It was a social situation. It was a group of my peers, and it looked to me like everyone was drinking, and I turned to him and I said, well, sure, I can tell you I didn't stand there and I didn't think about it. My family is full of alcoholism. It's been fatal for some of us, but of course it's never going to happen to me. And I said, sure, and the next question he asked me set up a pattern that I have been able to break only with a great deal of difficulty here with you. And what he asked me is what did I want? That's a pretty simple question. You know, I was immediately overwhelmed with a desire to be cool. It has nearly killed me. You know, it's not possible to be a more naive or unsophisticated 17 than I was. I didn't know what to ask for. I had no idea what to say And I have always been that way. I want you to see something other than what I think I am. You know, and it was just that way that night. I didn't want him to know that I didn't know what to ask for. And I turned to him and I said, y'all bring me whatever looks good. And that was a stupid thing to say. And this was not a stupid man. I've thought about him recently. And he had the most wonderful smile. You know, it was one of those smiles that just promised you a hell of a good time all the way to the bottom. I wonder what happened to him. But he brought me a tumbler of slow gin. You know, it's not hard to figure out what he was thinking about. And I finished that off, and he brought me another, and I began drinking that night at that party precisely the way I was going to stop drinking only 11 years later. Only 11 years later, I was going to be crawling on my hands and knees to reach those bottles I needed to drink so badly. I began drinking that night at that party, and I eventually passed out, and I'm sure the next morning when I came to that I was ashamed, that I was sick, that I was humiliated. I'm sure I said, that will never happen again, and yet I was never going to drink any other way. And what I know to say about me and about alcohol is to repeat what it says in the doctor's opinion, because I don't know how to say it better. It says there that men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. It says that the sensation is so elusive that even though we admit it is injurious, we come to believe that our drinking life is the only normal one. It says we become irritable, discontented, and bored unless we can experience the ease and comfort that come with just a few drinks that we see others taking with impunity. And that was my experience with drinking almost from the beginning. You know, I know about ease and comfort because it made it easy for me from that very first night to party, to socialize, to dance, to have a good time. I grew up so withdrawn and so shy. I mean, it literally was painful inside. And it made it easy for me to be a part of things for the first time in my life. It made me feel good, and that's why I drank. I always drank for the effect. I found it in that first drink, and it's what I was looking for the last time I ever took a drink. It was the way it made me feel. I don't remember how it tasted or how it smelled. You know, I don't remember how those first drinks looked. I remember exactly how they felt. And time went by, and on this campus, and I began carrying a pint around in my purse and drinking all through the day. It made everything so much easier. It made me fit in and feel just the way it did for me what it did for you. That's why we're here. It made everything so much easier. It made me feel so comfortable inside. It made it seem like it was possible to deal with life with ease. And this was the 60s, and I began doing a lot of drinking. And I don't know what it means in our book when it talks about crossing an invisible line between something that's called normal social drinking and alcoholic drinking. I had such tremendous problems with my drinking from the very beginning. And I began carrying these bottles around with me and drinking all through the day. And then this was the 60s, and it was a time on college campuses there were, especially where I'm from, where there was a lot of radicalism, a lot of student activism, a lot of demonstrations, and these were the people I was attracted to because whatever any of our stories are, I've never heard anyone stand at a podium and talk about either their drinking or their recovery without talking about changes in their attitude. And the more I drank, the more my attitude began to change, and what I was comfortable with and what I was attracted to began to change. And these were the people I began spending my time with. It was at that point that I began using a lot of drugs. That was going to be another big problem for me. And shortly thereafter, I was arrested on that campus in one of these demonstrations, and this was not a bad thing. You know, this was the 60s, and it was important to get busted somewhere for something if you were really putting effort into being cool, anyhow. And they put all our names on the front page of the Press Telegram, the local paper. That's because nothing ever happens in Long Beach, but I liked that. That felt like a little notoriety. I was loaded. I didn't care anyhow. And, you know, we'd rather have the cops here right now this morning than have to sit here and be bored. The right kind of notoriety, you know, in the right doses. We don't mind that. And I was bailed out late that night by by one of these groups, and then I thought about having to go home and having to face that hard Irish father. And to this day, he's still the hardest man I've ever known. And try and explain to him why I was in trouble still again. This wasn't the first time there'd been trouble. And rather than do that, I waited to the next afternoon when I knew that man wouldn't be there, and I walked in that house with a couple cardboard boxes, and I emptied out a few drawers, and I left. And I was never going to live any other way until I got to Alcoholics Anonymous. I moved from Long Beach all the way down to Huntington Beach. And I know you don't know where that is. That's about 10 miles away. That's all the geographic you get from me today. A lot of you drank, and you went to, you went to New York, you went to Kansas City, you went to Mexico. I drank, and I went to Huntington Beach. There's sort of a dramatic impact lacking there. I just always found it real hard to get up off the floor. I never went anywhere. And I always describe that place I moved into, because I don't have to do it again this morning. They were all going to be the same. Every place I ever lived was going to be just like this one. It was small, and it was dirty, and it was cheap, and there were a bunch of us living there. And I remember laying on the mattress on the floor those first nights and looking around, and all I know to tell you is I had not been raised to be comfortable in a place like that, and I can tell you how I felt. I felt absolutely at home. I felt as if for the first time in my life I was finally with people who didn't expect anything from me, that now I was free to do and to be whatever I wanted, and I was going to say that for a long, long time. I stayed down there the next 12, 18 months before I moved back into Long Beach, and by the time I moved back up to Long Beach, I moved up to Long Beach to run the streets. In that next period of a year and a half or so, I had become so much sicker. And by the time I moved back into Long Beach, I was still not yet quite 21 years old. And what I know to tell you is I needed to be here. I needed to have been in these rooms. I needed help desperately, and no one could have convinced me of that. I was, by that point in time, I was a chronic alcoholic. I was drinking very heavily. I drank on a daily basis. I was addicted to several different drugs. I had been arrested again. I had already come to, for the first time, in a locked ward at Norwalk at the State Mental Hospital as a suicide. I had dropped out of college in my junior year. It's impossible to accomplish anything living the way I was living, and I had become literally unemployable. There were going to be times then and in the years ahead when I would come up with little jobs, and I lost every job I ever had because I would show up drunk or loaded, or I would just drift away. And I'm someone who found another solution for dealing with life, and what I began to do was to move in with what became a long line of men. I moved in with whoever would just take me in, and then I stayed there until I was kicked back out, because that's how it always went for me. And I know if you're new, what you think you're hearing me talk about up here is no more than the circumstances of my life. And I'm trying to tell you a whole lot more than that about me. What I'm telling you is that I have always been someone, one way or another, who has said, I can't do it, you do it. You buy it, you fix it, you take care of me, you get me out of this one, you cover for me, you love me, I can't. And the doorway for freedom for me here in Alcoholics Anonymous was that when I came here, you told me that this was going to have to be my decision, that you could not make it for me. You said you'd walk along with me, but I had to make the decision. And I believe that. I believe that was the doorway to freedom for me once I got here to you. But it's only in looking back that I can see these things. I didn't know it then. So I moved into Long Beach, and I moved over on the west side just off Anaheim Street. And I know you don't know Long Beach. That's a very hard part of town. And I was very comfortable there. I was very comfortable there because I felt like I didn't have to look over my shoulder. Everyone else was living the way I was living. And the problems I had in my life and the conditions of my life became steadily worse. They were already bad, and they were going to become a lot worse. A couple of years later, I found myself sitting on some stone steps over on the west side of Long Beach, staring at the ground between my feet. And as I sat there on those steps that late morning or early afternoon, I thought, this is it. This is how it feels to sell your soul. And I can't stand up here this morning and tell you that I sat there and I cared, because I didn't. I felt old, and I felt all used up, and I felt all burned out. And 23 is young to feel that way, and I was still not close to getting to you. I sat on those steps by that point in time, and I was an absolutely hopeless drunk. There was nothing I could do about the way I drank and the things that happened when I drank. And I sat on those steps that day as a heroin addict. And all I have to say from this podium about that time in my life is just to tell you that I am someone who has learned absolutely everything, I hope, that I ever want to know about shame and degradation and humiliation and remorse. Because that is a dirty way for a woman to live, and I live that way freely. For a long time after I got to you, I wanted to say that it was conditions and circumstances that made me into the things I became before I got to you. And there were those at my early meetings that said, you know, Johanna, sooner or later you are going to have to learn how to take responsibility for yourself. And those old-timers were right. No one ever twisted my arm. I made every decision I ever made in my life based on my needs of the moment. And my needs at that moment, by that point in time, were very simple. And I'll tell you what I always said. I always said, I'm free. I'm free and I'm living the way I want to live, and I am not hurting anyone unless it's myself. And I had to get here and sit with you to find out there isn't any alcoholic, no matter what the outside of our story is like, that knows what freedom is. One way or another, we have been living in bondage. And I had to get to steps 8 and 9 to be amends steps to find out that the truth was that there had never been anyone in my life that I hadn't hurt, that I hadn't lied to, that I hadn't stolen from, that I hadn't manipulated, that I hadn't abused, sometimes very badly. Now that was the truth. I couldn't see it that way then. And so, you know, when I ask for a grateful heart, I don't have to look any farther than where I came from. I don't think it's ever necessary to do more than that. I sometimes forget how it felt to live that way unless I stand at one of these podiums. You know, it's then that I recall how it was. I remember how it felt to sit on those steps that afternoon and stare at the ground. I remember how dirty I was and how sick I was. And my world had gotten so small while I said I was free. You know, what I needed when I came to in the morning was a drink. And a few hours later I had to go get well. And that was my life. It had become so small and so narrow. And all I know is that 23 is not, it hadn't been that many years since I walked away from that little Catholic girls' school with all those hopes and all those dreams. And that's what I know about alcoholism. I know that sooner or later it's going to take it all. You know, it may be very fast. For me it was. That's my story. And for some it's very slow. The story is different. But sooner or later it takes all of the spirit out of our heart, and there we sit, and we don't know what's wrong. And that's the way I was that day. I continue to live in the ways I have described for then and through all the years that came. And they were ugly years, and it was painful. I know it's painful to listen to. It was painful to live. You know, those years for me are a story of being in and out of all the little bars up and down Anaheim Street and Coast Highway, all the little hotel rooms and motel rooms. It's being in and out of the free clinics and the county health facilities and the pawn shops and the blood banks. This is the way I found to solve the problems in my life. And this was the very best that I knew how to do. And I found myself a few years farther down the road now in a room in downtown Long Beach. And as I came to in a hallway, I had apparently been there for some days. I was black and blue. And as I sat up, I propped myself up against the wall behind me, and I looked around. And one more time, I had a solution for what was wrong in my life. And one more time, it wasn't me. You know, I looked around that room, and I thought the problem here is plain to see. It's all these junkies I live with. It is no wonder I am always in trouble. And if I wasn't sponsored, I'd still do that today. You know, it's natural to me to blame it on you. And I always did that. It was never me. It was always people, places, and things. It was conditions and circumstances. You know, it was bad luck. It was bad timing. It was the cops. It was no money. It was crummy karma, but it was never me. And I thought, if I just get out of here, then surely things have got to improve for me. And I moved up to North Long Beach, and that's another story altogether. It took me a while to get cleaned up. And what I did once I cleaned up enough is I went out and I tried to find a job. And I'm sure it's obvious by now that I am not someone that had a resume or a list of references to hand out. Surely that's obvious. And it was real hard to come up with a job, and I wanted one desperately. I didn't know what to do about myself. There were times, because there had been more arrests, certainly, then when a condition of probation I had was that I also make an effort to get some help. And I did that briefly several times, and it's probably worth talking about. I used to wonder when I left the offices of these therapists, even though I never stuck with it, why I felt worse than when I first sat down. And I know why that is today. You know, I was willing to sit there, and I was willing to talk about the problems I had with addiction because that was cool. I would talk about that. Let me tell you what I never did. I never talked about my drinking. I never talked about how much I drank. I never talked about what I drank. I never said I can't stop because I didn't know that yet. You know, I never talked about how I was living if you didn't already know. It is no wonder I never got any help. I had to come here and sit with you to learn how to be honest. I am not honest by nature. I am very good at giving you whatever I think you need to see to get back from you whatever I have to have. And that's manipulation. That has nothing to do with honesty. I sat in these rooms when I was new and I would listen to you talk, and I thought, how can anyone be that vulnerable or open themselves up that much? I was not impressed. I was horrified. And what I learned when I was a child is if I don't let anyone know what I think or how I feel, it is impossible for you to hurt me. And that causes us to build walls that are very hard to take back down. It has been hard for me. And so I would listen to you talk this way, but then I also had to watch. I had to watch the people come up to you after the meetings. I watched the people direct their attention to you. I watched you begin to feel better. And I have learned how to be honest by listening to you be honest. I need to see you do the things that you talk about. You know, you can't just tell me about it. I have to see you do it. That's the only way I have learned. I have learned about honesty, listening to you be honest. And so I never got any help, and there had been all kinds of problems, and I came up with this job, and they fired me less than 3 months later. They fired me as I walked in the door to that little office at 8 o'clock in the morning because I walked in drunk. It had occurred to me not to do a lot of other things. It never occurred to me not to drink. You know, it talks in our book about the phenomena of craving, and I know a lot about that. I really do. I know how it feels to believe you're going to die if you don't have another drink. And what I drank the last three or 4 years I drank was Santa Fe White Port. And I don't know if you have Santa Fe in Oklahoma. If you don't, it's a sad thing. There's something real home-like about Santa Fe White Port, I always thought. It's very cheap. No, that's why I drank it. You can smell it coming a long ways away, you know. That's why they fired me. And I went back to this little room I was living in, and I continued to drink. And now I'm going to talk about my drinking because I was at the end. I would sit there and I would drink and pass out and come to, and I would drink again. And in the last years I drank, there were times when I was so sick that my legs wouldn't work, and I had to crawl to get a hold of those bottles. I had my jaws clenched, and I would drool, and I couldn't stop. I was toxic. I had to sit here and listen to you to find out what alcoholic poisoning was. I was so sick. And I would drink and sit there and think that today is going to be just like yesterday, and yesterday was no good. And tomorrow is going to be just like today, and it's not going to be any good either. I was 27 years old, and I had it. I was waiting for the end. And in the second page of A Vision for You, it says the day will come when he cannot imagine life either with alcohol or without it. And then he will know loneliness such as few do. He will be at the jumping off place, and he will wish for the end. And I sat there dirty and scared, and I was alone. And that was the way I felt. When I read this book, Alcoholics Anonymous, I understood that the people who wrote it knew how I felt, that they had drank the way I drank, that they needed another drink the way I needed another drink. And I was 27 years old as I sat there, and there wasn't anything I could do, and there was no one in my life I could turn to. There wasn't anyone left. I had abused everyone around me. My family had long since shut the door on me. And I was waiting for it all just to be over. I didn't understand what was wrong with me. I didn't know why I felt the way I felt. All I knew was that I needed another drink. And at some point, and it was read in chapter 3, our book uses the phrase twice, pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. And anyone that ends up staying in these rooms has a moment that they look back to and can apply those words to. And for me, it came during that period of time, and I needed a bottle. And I got down the steps of this little room I was living in, and I got down to the end of this block, and I needed to cross the street to get to the liquor store. And it was a small street. It was not a large boulevard. And I stood on that corner, and I was dirty because I didn't take care of myself. I was too sick. I was afraid to take a bath. I was afraid to do anything. I was very dirty. And I was thin because I didn't eat. And I stood on that corner, and I needed a drink. And I was absolutely terrified to set my foot off the curb and cross that little street. And I stood there on that corner, and I wrapped my arms around myself, and I began to cry. And in the end, that was what it had come down to. I was pitiful. You know, left to myself, I will make anything tragic. I will make anything romantic. It will become some other kind of a story. And I need to remember myself as I was. I was a grown woman, and I could not take care of myself at all anymore. I need to remember myself as I was, because what it gives me back when I do that is the humility to practice this program in my life today, because it has been very nearly 13 years since I had to stand there and need a drink in that way. I could easily forget. That's how I am when I drink. And so time went by, and I was living in the way I have described. I was drinking in the way I have described. And I came to on what was later going to turn out to be a Sunday, and as I came to in a chair I'd passed out in the night before, I reached for the pint to drink what was left in the bottle. And as I held that bottle in my hand, sitting there alone, I saw myself for the very first time in my life precisely as I was. It was that moment of clarity. And I have always been able to live in fantasy. When I don't like where I am, I just go away. And I didn't do that morning. What I saw sitting in that chair was what brought me to you. Because what I saw sitting there was simply a hopeless, helpless, alcoholic woman. I saw a drunk, period. And that was the beginning for me. To this very day, I do not know the difference between beginnings and endings. All I ever know is the pain and the hurt and the loss or the sickness of the endings. It has never yet occurred to me at those times that nothing ends, but that something else does not begin. That's how life is. And so it was for me. I know it's a gift for me to be in this room today because of what I did next. I found a dime, and I went to a payphone in the building next door. I didn't have a phone. I didn't have anything. And I dialed information for the number of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I still don't know why I did that. Until I learn differently, I have to believe that somewhere at some time, in a blackout, in one of those bars or those little hotel rooms, someone sat with me and talked to me about a place for people like me to go, and they called it Alcoholics Anonymous. All I know is that the name was there when I needed it, and it has been that way for me ever since. A woman came and picked me up and took me to my first meeting, and I can't remember it. I was too drunk. All I know is that when she dropped me off, she said, "You know, Johanna, you shouldn't be alone." She said, "I want to come back here tonight and take you to a woman's recovery house." And I had no idea what she was talking about. I'd never heard of such a thing. And she explained it to me. She said it was a place where a group of women lived together. And she said they didn't drink, and they tried to help each other. And I'll tell you, I thought that was one of the most disgusting ideas I had ever heard. A lot of women all together, nobody drinking. You know, it sounds bad. And She ignored me. She came back that evening anyhow. Now, this is a woman who knew how to complete a 12-step call. And all I know is that when she came back, I went with her. I don't know why I did that either. And she took me to a little step house in Bellflower. It was called Little House. And it truly was. There were maybe 7 beds there. And the house mother met me as I walked in the door. And we could not have been more different as people. But she's probably the reason I get to be here today. That woman met me and she put her arms around me and she held me and she said, "Honey, it is going to be okay." And I have never forgotten how good she made me feel. I knew she was wrong. Now, I didn't even know what I was doing there, but she made me feel so good and she held me. And those girls put me to bed and I hallucinated. I was so sick. I left sometime in the next 48 hours because I felt like I needed a drink a whole lot more than I needed you. You know, my sobriety date is a year later from my first meeting, and all I did right in that next year was to keep drifting back to her because she knew how to keep the door open. She never said, "You are too sick, you're not willing enough, we can't do these things." She just kept taking me back in as I was. And all I know is that at one point I finally made a commitment to her to try and stay for 30 days. And by that point in time, I had lost the ability to talk. No one could have ever said I would one day stand at these podiums. I could no longer put my words together so they made any sense. I couldn't memorize the Serenity prayer. Nothing you said made any sense to me. And I would sit on the couch with the other girls, and I would cry, and I would shake. And I knew I was making a mistake. I didn't know why I was staying there. And they had meetings they brought into this little house all the time. And it was after one of those meetings, it was a book study meeting. And one more time, I had not understood anything any of you had said during that meeting. It was after one of those meetings that a man crossed the room to me, and he shook my hand. He just took a minute for a newcomer. And he said the most important words I have ever heard, and they're the most important words in my life today. He said, "Johanna, I just want to make sure you know that you don't have to live that way anymore if you don't want to." He said, "You just don't have to do it that way no more." You know, and I had heard you talk about sobriety, and I wasn't sure that I wanted it. And I heard you talk about not drinking, and I knew I was not going to be able to do that. What he told me is I didn't have to walk back out on those streets and keep doing what I had been doing to get there in the first place. I never forgot what he said. And it was with the sense of those words that I finally surrendered to this program that we are trying to share with each other this weekend. I come now to the only thing I believe I am obligated to talk about when I talk about Alcoholics Anonymous as a program of recovery, and that is our concept of God, of a power greater than ourselves. There's no way around it. That is the core of this program. And what it tells me in my big book is that it was written to enable me to find a power greater than myself, which would enable me to solve my problem. It tells me that lack of power was my dilemma, and that I had to find a power by which I could live, and that it had to be a power greater than myself. And you said these things, and I was new, and you talked about God so much. And I found that by that point in time, I could not use the idea of God that I had grown up with. And it's not because I'm saying it's a bad idea. I don't mean that. I don't believe that. I'm just saying that at that time and in my condition, I needed another approach. And I sat there late one night. I couldn't sleep when I was new, and I'd wait for everyone to get up in the morning. And this particular night, I sat and I looked at a copy of the 12 Steps. And I had pretty much already decided I was wasting my time with you, that this was not going to work for me, that if God was that important, I was going to have to leave. And I sat there that night and I looked at these steps, and all I know to tell you is that late at night in the step house in Bellflower, California, shaking and sick and unable to think coherently, I got what I needed simply because I asked. It's not any more complicated than that. It wasn't so for me. This book and these steps mean only what they say. I think sometimes we can make it sound almost incomprehensible. What I had done, not understanding what I was doing, I was much too sick to understand it, was I stopped fighting whatever I had been fighting all of my life.
And when I was able to stop for just that little bit of time, something else was able to enter. And that is what we mean when we talk about surrender in this program, about abandoning ourselves to God. And all I know is I was quiet for the rest of that night for the first time in many, many years. And I had the sense of God as a path or as a way, and I understood that even for someone like me, there had to be a reason and there had to be a place. And, sometimes to this very day I have trouble with that. Sometimes I want to think when I'm better, when I'm more good, when I'm no longer angry, when I'm no longer selfish, that then I will be truly loved and of value. I don't think God loves me or has a place for me any more now than when I was drunk. I believe it has always been open to me, and it has always been infinite. There's a man in this program that used to talk about an infinite father, an infinite journey, and an infinite child. And it has always been there. I don't think that I am more loved because I am sober. It's only that because I'm sober I can understand that I'm loved. And so I grabbed this idea, and I have to say that God has been easy for me. It has not been hard. And that's not true for everyone. And what it says in the back of our book in the spiritual appendix is that we experience here a change in personality sufficient to bring about recovery from alcoholism. It's very matter of fact. And it goes on to say that for many of us, the spiritual experience does not need to be overwhelming, nor does it need to be an instant transformation. It says that for many of us, that experience, that spiritual experience is of the educational variety, that it happens slowly over a period of time, that the newcomer experiences an alteration in his reaction to life. That's such a simple idea. Anyone can use that. A change that he could not have brought about by himself alone. It's that look we see in the eyes of the new man and the new woman when their eyes light up from the inside. We come to realize each in our own way, in our own time, and on our own terms, as it should be, that God is doing for us what we cannot do for ourselves. And if I could do this, I wouldn't be here because I wouldn't need you. It happens for me because I come and I sit in these rooms with you. I believe that in Alcoholics Anonymous, what I have found is something that touches my soul. When I sit in these meetings, I feel that. I feel you touch the very center of me, and I understand when you talk that I'm just like you. I have felt that every time I've sat in a meeting, and I have been still enough inside to pay attention. Expect a miracle. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't expect miracles when I was new. I didn't expect to find the thing that you had. And I have it today. I don't have any special answers. I don't know anything anyone else doesn't know if they just pick up the book. That's what I know. I don't have special answers. All I know is that if I come back and I do what you do one more day, I'm going to get to feel the way you feel. And so I tried to do the things that I heard people talking about when I was new in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I am not going to go on at great length about that first year, although it was the most important year of all. That's the year everything changed. And I got sober in a very large, active group, and I became a part of setting up the meeting. I couldn't talk. You don't need to be able to talk in meetings to get sober. I couldn't. You just need to keep coming back. And they understood that, and they found things that I could do where I didn't have to talk. I wasn't very social. It wasn't intentional. I was just too afraid. And I would set up the meetings and get involved with these people, and time went by, and I had gone through the first 3 steps, and I took my 4th and my 5th step in an absolute terror that I was going to drink. It was old ideas in sobriety here when I was new got me in enough trouble. I was certain I was going to drink. And it was when I walked away from taking my 1st, 5th step, I was maybe 5 months sober, that I understood what it means later on in chapter 5 when it talks about the sunlight of the Spirit. I knew what that phrase meant because I had done what you told me you did, and that meant that at that moment I got to feel the way you said you felt. It was mine then, and that's how this works. I went on with 6 and 7, and I made a list, and I made my amends. I came to an understanding of 10, and I learned that 11 is not filling, something to be ignored between 10 and 12. Step 11 is the reason I get to stand up here today. It's sort of the premium that I pay on my insurance policy in sobriety. And I have needed to draw on that very heavily in the last years. I don't know what I could have skipped and still had everything here in place for me. Step 11 made it possible for me to go on to Step 12 and to understand the joys and the pleasures of carrying this message to someone else, of taking a panel into a hospital or a jail, to understand that I could go to people that were living the way I had been living and truly tell them it didn't have to be that way anymore. I understood how to sponsor women because I was in my turn sponsored. And all of these things have been a big part of my life in sobriety, and everything else had to change as well. I was told in my home group by one of these old-timers that, you know how they come up to you and they give you advice that you never asked for, and he said, Johanna, I suggest you find a job. He said, it's about time. And I was offended. What I had done was apply for state disability as an alcoholic. Once you convinced me it was a disease, I thought, well, that's it. They ought to pay me. I didn't want to be an employee. I've never been real hot on employment anyhow. And he told me to do this, and I explained to this man no one was going to hire me. And he said, you're stupid. They talk that way to you when you're new. He said, you don't know what's going to happen. He said, it's your business to do the footwork, period. He said, you go do that and tell me what happens. So I could tell him how wrong he was, and of course someone hired me. And I kept that job for the next 3 years. I want to take just a second to tell you what it gave me. It gave me the first I had ever known in my life of responsibility. I have never been responsible. And with that job, I got a paycheck, and that meant I got to open a checking account. I was 28 years old when I got sober, and I had never had a checking account. It meant I got to sit down and write a check and pay for an apartment myself. I had never done that. It meant that I sat there and cried the first time I ever wrote a check to pay one of my own utility bills. You know, I know that's a very small thing, but it's a big thing to me. It's the truth is that it's the things that only sound small on the surface that have marked so far every place where I have turned around the corner to the next thing in this program. It sounds small and it feels big. The truth is that it was the small things that brought me to you, not the big things. I have a street story. I could go on for a long time about how I lived out there. The truth is that as much as anything else, it was walking into those liquor stores early in the morning to buy those bottles of cheap wine. And seeing that look I have seen so many times in my life, in so many places, that look that's a mixture of pity and contempt and disgust. And all I need to tell you is that for 12 years and 9 months, no one has looked at me that way, and I don't need more than that to have already been overpaid in this program. And I went on, and I was single when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I expected to remain that way, and truthfully I was at peace with that idea. My life had never felt as good as it did. And time went by, and I began dating a man from my home group. And we broke up after a while. We provided a lot of entertainment for the group. You too, huh? And then we got back together, and time went by, and when I was 15 months sober, and he was 9 months sober, we got married. And there's never been anything I meant more than the vows I took that day. I wanted to be a good wife more than anything in the world. You know, and it was a big day, and I have in the past always talked about that wedding and the things I felt and the things I wanted at some length, and I don't do that anymore. But I will tell you that I wanted to be a good wife. And the hardest thing I have had to learn how to do in sobriety is how to live in peace with another human being. You know, you can put me in a room with a catatonic, and sooner or later there's going to be a lot of trouble. And what I know is that you can take this program into the home. I've never learned how to do it 100%, but I got good enough to feel at peace in my own heart. I learned through difficulty, not through ease, how to keep my eyes on myself. And we had a life that was very, very good in many, many ways for a long time together. We went to our meetings together, and we tried to put a life together that felt good, that felt good to us. We bought a home in Orange County, and time went by, and this man went back out. And this was maybe somewhere between, maybe it was 4 years ago or so. And he had a very difficult time trying to get back, and it broke my heart. And in that period of time, I knew so much pain. I would dream of my father's hands, you know. I know a whole lot about alcoholism, and none of it is from a textbook. I am the granddaughter of alcoholics and the daughter of an alcoholic. I am the niece of alcoholics. You know, I'm an alcoholic. I have never had a relationship with anyone who was not an alcoholic or an addict. There's a lot of pain in these relationships when there isn't sobriety. And I cried all the time. And he finally got back, and it looked like he was doing better, and a few more years went by. And what I knew is that I'd said sickness or health, and I was supposed to mean that. And it was last summer that I looked at him one evening, and I understood he had never made it back at all. And he weighed about 118 pounds. He had to look that sick before I finally understood what was wrong. You know, and I talked about that in the beginning. I'm always willing to live in fantasy. Now, I don't go into it a whole lot from the podium. My alcoholism is what I share with you. But I, too, was an addict. I don't know what I thought I was looking at every night. Apparently, it was more important to me to live happily ever after than to look across that table and call what I saw by the right name. You know, I didn't want to see it, and I didn't want to admit it, and I learned those things when I was a kid. What I'm seeing is not what I'm really seeing. It's hard to unlearn those things. I didn't know I still did it. And I took him to a hospital in Long Beach, and he left. And the next few months, all last fall, was a very difficult time. And he finally became willing to go to a recovery house up in Northern California. He went, as a matter of fact, to Duffy's place. And when he came home 3 weeks later, he stayed home a week. And he sat down one night with me and said, you know, the reason I have so much trouble and the only way I'm going to get sober is if I leave. And he did. And he filed for a divorce a few months later, and in August our divorce was final. And I want to tell you another story now, the story you didn't hear from me. I talked to you about how it felt when I was out there. I didn't tell you that I broke my father's heart. I was his oldest child, and my father was an alcoholic. He never behaved the way I did. My father tried to haul me out of places no father should see a daughter. My mother called morgues on holidays trying to find out if I was alive. It was my parents I called to bail me out of the city jails and the county jails. It was my parents that called the sheriffs to haul me off to the mental hospital after another of those dramatic suicide attempts. You know, there was a lot of ugliness in my relationships with others before I got to you. I always said when I was new, no one ever cared about me. Now that's not true. There wasn't anyone that didn't. I was unable to be helped because I was unwilling. I caused a lot of damage, and I caused a lot of pain in the lives of others. And I didn't understand how it felt to them because it had never been my intention to hurt someone else. I didn't mean for it to be that way, and neither did he. He did not mean to hurt me. You know, I know that's true. What I also know is what it says in the book. It's the truest thing I have in my life is our book. I go back to it all the time. It says there, burn the idea into the consciousness of the new man that he can get sober regardless of anything or anybody, wife or no wife, home or no home, job or no job, if he trusts in God and clean house. Now that's the condition for this program. And I know he had to leave, but not to get sober for his own reasons. And he probably made the right decision for himself. You know, he seems to do well today. That's all I know. What I also know is what the last year has meant to me, because it broke my heart. You know, I did not want this marriage to end. I cared about him a lot, and I truly wish him well. I have had to go through another surrender at absolute death, flat on my face on the floor. I have had one more time needed to learn how to turn my will and my life over the care of God, and I do not always keep it there. But many, many times I feel the feeling I felt when I was first new. I feel that level of surrender, that surrender where you just say, okay, whatever it is, I am willing to show up just a little bit farther. And what I know is that when I am able to keep myself in that place with God's help, I can tell you that the price has not been too high. You know, I can get lost and sidetracked so easily in daily life that I forget what the center is meant to be. The center is meant to be, you know, an infinite journey under the care of God's hands. You know, and I lose that. I want to fix it and make it different and have it be my way. I have needed to learn many, many things in the last year. I am trying to put my life together in a new way, and I am often frightened. It'd be real shoddy for me not to say that. I'm not always certain what I'm doing. I don't always feel at ease. I sometimes feel lonely. I like the companionship of marriage, and I don't have that in my life today. I've also learned that it's not lethal. You know, I can call a friend. I can go to a meeting. I can go over to someone else's house. Those things are all open to me, or those are things I didn't used to know. I have learned a lot. And what I know is that faith is a decision of the will. It's nice when the feelings are there. And I have had to learn that faith is when I can't see anything good coming, and I am willing to believe anyhow. I believe that in God's hands and in God's time, everything that needs to be added to my life will be added, and that which needs to be removed will be removed, and that's all I know. I was very new when I was taken to a roundup that we have every year in the summer, and I heard a man speak at the closing meeting, and he's the man that changed my life. Not because he's more special than anyone else. He was just the one that touched my heart. And he said many, many things that day, and one of the things he said was that being spiritual was being wanted and needed and loved. And I never forgot those words, although I did not understand them. And it was 9.5 years ago that I laid in a hospital bed down in Newport Beach near where I live, and I remembered that man and those words, and I finally understood what he had meant. When I was 19 years old, I walked away from a county building in San Diego, and I left behind a 6-week-old daughter that I could not and I would not take care of. And that was the one thing in my early sobriety that I could not forgive myself for. There seemed to be no amend I could make. And what I knew is that something I would never have was children or a family of my own. And I was in that hospital 9 years ago because I had just given birth to our oldest child. It was a little boy, and he was healthy. And I don't know how to tell you how much I wanted that baby. I was so excited that I laid awake all night, and I thought about what had happened to my life since I first sat with you. And I understood that night that it is because of you that I am wanted, needed, and loved. It's because I came and I sat here with you that I found a place in this world at last. I think I had been looking for that feeling all of my life. It used to be just here I had it, and now I have it anywhere I go, and it came from you. I understood what it means in a book I use every morning. It says, God has no reproach for anything he has healed. And I believe we come together, and together we are healed in these rooms. You know, it's God that draws straight with crooked lines. He has made of my life the life I live today, and I am a better woman than I have ever been. He gave me the women of Alcoholics Anonymous to learn how to be. Everything I know about a woman, I have learned about being a woman, I have learned from these women here in these rooms. You know, I am grateful for the men, certainly, and many of you are my friends, but the women have taught me how to live. They have touched my soul, and they never made me feel bad about how I was when I was new, and they let me try and be like them. And today, I don't even think about it anymore. You know, all that is good in my life has come from these rooms. It has all come from here. And I took that little baby home, and a few years later I had another son. And those children have never seen their mother drunk or their mother loaded. They have never been neglected. They have never been abandoned. I have never walked out on them. I know how I am when I drink and when I use. Their life would be horrible. And it hasn't been that way at all. I have been there for walk them into the first days of school. I've been there for the first soccer games and the first baseball games. I've watched them learn how to swim. I haven't missed any of it. I've been a part of life in their classrooms. And I look at their little faces when I go and pick them up from school each afternoon, up to right now, and they're happy, and they're glad to see their mother. You know, you took me off the streets of Long Beach and made me into whoever it is that I am today, and I am so grateful for that. I am not a patient person. I'm a long way from being a perfect mother. I am easily angered, but my children know that I love them. And I try and take this program into the home. And I learned how to make amends to my children when they were infants. And I let them know that I don't know how to be a mother. And they need to tell me back how they need for me to be. And we talk to each other. And there's something good between the three of us. Whatever else has happened in my life, I am still a woman with a family. And I don't know how I'm supposed to thank you for that. I have done hospital and institutional work all through my sobriety. I still do. And I have always had a panel at a county hospital. And I want to tell you about a woman that I saw there a long time ago now, and then I'm going to sit down. I'm all done. She was in a ward, and she was yellow. The whites of her eyes had literally turned orange. She was so sick. She was full of wine sores and cigarette burns, and there were a lot of tubes. Her liver was very, very distended. She had wrists that were like straws. I have never seen wrists that were so thin. I am sure she was a lot younger than she looked. And we went up to the side of that bed, and we said the things you say about Alcoholics Anonymous to someone who was new. And she didn't want to hear it. But she looked up at me, and this woman had blue eyes. It was like looking at myself, and she changed me that day. You know, I had once come to on a ward in a county hospital not knowing how I had gotten there myself. And she looked up at me, and as we went on talking, she became angry and hostile, and she wanted us out of the room. And she looked into my eyes, and she said, "You don't understand." How many times have I heard that since then? A lot of times. You know, of course I understand. I understand exactly. She said, "I don't need AA because drinking's not my problem. And when I just get out of here, I know how to straighten out my own life." And we just left her literature and told her we would check back on her the following week. And we did that. And the point is that, not just to my talk, but to any meeting, the point is that that woman was right. She did not need Alcoholics Anonymous, and drinking was not her problem because she was dead. She never got here. She never got to take a chip, celebrate a birthday, sit down and make a friend over a cup of coffee. No one in her family ever looked at her with any respect. She never got to experience any of it. You know, she died a drunk in a county hospital on a ward. You know, and I can forget that this is a fatal disease, that it is terminal in nature, and that it's ugly. I can get caught up in sobriety, in people, places, and things. What I learned from her is that I either treasure and I value what I find when I come together with you, or I have to walk back out of here this morning to precisely what I left behind almost 13 years ago, and I see no reason to believe it would ever be any different for me than it was. I have this, or I have absolutely nothing at all. There is a line repeated many times through our big book, and it says, in essence each time, that the great miracle for us is that we have discovered a common solution. And some part of me has known from the very beginning that that just has to be another way of saying that together, because we need each other so much. I need you. I have never needed you more. Together, we don't have to live that way anymore if we don't want to. We just don't have to do it that way anymore. And I need to thank you. It's my business to thank you for the seat that was open to me when I was new and the seat I'm going to take right now. Thank you for having me here.